Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I'm wait just another minute here or so to let everybody else get logged on, but we'll start here shortly. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started here. For those who don't know me, my name is Jay Phillips, and I'm the senior here in Centralized Service Division at OPI. I want to take a minute and welcome everybody for coming and meeting with us again to go over a little bit about the CSCT process and some updates that we have. And so real quick, I do want to introduce Megan Peel, who is here from Department of Public Health and Human Services. And Megan, if you're available, I might ask you this morning if you could give us an update on the bridge funding, and I guess maybe introduce if you have other staff here with you as well.
Sure. Hi, my name is Megan Peel. I'm the Children's Mental Health Bureau Chief in DPHHS. I think I have a couple listening in, but they're not on as panelists. So I do have an update on the bridge funding that was given to us to help with the transition period. We received about $2.3 million in bridge funding, and as of November 15th, we have expended $1,050,000 in state bridge funding, and then have another $180,000 in the claims that are scheduled to process soon. So about $1,230,000 has been spent. So just around half.
Great, thanks, Megan. And then, Megan, real quick, I think, based on our discussions we had last week, is that the timing, I guess the duration the bridge funding would be available is that we're still projecting out that would actually make it through for all of the November claims, and that it's potentially that there's also part of the December claims that may be covered as well, correct?
Yes, we are going to be having our analysts do a little bit more detailed projections based on our current utilization and the changes that were occurring in our Medicaid processing system. But yeah, we still definitely anticipate that all of November claims will be covered with bridge funding, and then there will likely be a fairly significant amount remaining to help cover December claims. So you will likely just have a partial match at the beginning of January for claims delivered in December.
Right, perfect. And then I don't know, Megan, do you like those the scheduled documents that we talked about last week? Do you want me to bring those up? Do we want to talk? Are you okay to talk about those this morning? Or you guys think we want to wait till we finalize it and have it in the next meeting?
I probably can't talk about it.
Okay, so just so everybody knows, sorry I put you on the spot there.
Okay.
So the DPHHS, actually, Christine over there, DPHHS and Megan's team did a really good job and came up with an actual document that shows for each one of the months the submission date and kind of the process, as we talked about IGT and the timing of when claims are submitted, the time frame of when OPI and DPHHS have time to actually process and certify all of the activity, and then the actual release into the payments. There is a guidance document that will have the dates out there for each one of the claim submission months. But again, I think we'll wait until the next meeting because I do want to make sure we have time with DPHHS to finalize it, make sure our dates, everything looks accurate. But for the next meeting, that's something that we can present to everybody, so you guys have that as a resource. So, did you have anything else, Megan? You need to add or no?
Nope.
Okay.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Well, guys, we have a pretty short agenda today. So one of the things I do want to go over real quick is we did get from DPHHS and OPI, we updated the CSCT workflow, and then also have a couple updates to the accounting guidance document. And so out on our website, if you could go out there, you can actually have the link. And I asked Tristan this morning to update that link so it has the current guidance document out there. So you might want to give us until later in the afternoon today to make sure that that's out there and posted, but be looking for that. No significant changes to the process itself, just more of some of the wording as for like the types of things that are submitted by the schools in the process, like the match certification form, and then supporting documents is listed on there. And so be something you guys can go out there and review. And then also out there that's going to be updated, I'll share with my screen here real quick, is the match certification worksheet that we created. And so one of the things that we were asked is that out throughout the meetings this week that I've gotten with people is that there was an instructions tab out here. And if you remember, this, again, this is that workbook where when match claims or when match payments are submitted to OPI, that the CSCT expenditure certification form will need to be completed. And again, the workbook itself has, these gray areas here are self-populating, and then these areas up here, and there's one box down here that actually will be hand-keyed by those that are actually creating the form. And again, this is the standard form that will be used to fill out and make sure that the match itself, the requirement for the claims that are submitted, is actually being met. And that you guys have documentation for, again, what we call the direct CSCT expenditures, and then the non-direct CSCT expenditures tab. So on that instructions tab, I have created on here for the CSCT expenditure certification form. It goes through step by step in what you actually need to actually enter. Again, does make a note here that any of the cells that are on that certification form are that are gray highlighted are self-populating because they're linked to these other two workbook tabs, the CSCT Direct and the CSCT Non-Direct. The cells in here that are actually linked, that are blue, are actually linked to the actual cell on that certification form. So like here in step 1, if you were to click on cell B2, it'll automatically take you over here to this cell is where you're going to go in there and enter in that claim, that local match and for the month and year you're submitting. For instructions, again, on number 2 would be where you enter in your school district name. B4 is like the provider treatment MPI number, and then cell B5 is that claim month match requirement from MIS. And again, all of these that are highlighted blue, if you are, as you're going through the instructions, if you click on that, it'll automatically link you over to that cell, so then you know that's the one that you're working on for the instructions. Also included in here is the supporting documents. And so in our conversations that we've been having about what needs to be submitted in addition to the actual warrant for that match requirement, a couple things that OPI is going to be asking for. First thing is that for any of your claims that you submit the first time, or if at any time throughout that year, if there's a change in the negotiated rate with your third-party provider, OPI has requested that you guys submit a copy of that contract to us. And one of the key things that we really need to make sure in there is that we can see in the language that it talks about or that it identifies what the actual charge for the service is going to be. And for those of you that have joined us, we've talked about that negotiated rate and making sure that they maintain ideally at that 65% of that approved per day per diem rate from CMS. And so for OPI, the intention of having that is so that we can actually see when claims come in and we see one that is submitted, and let's say again, if it's at that 65%, that's the type of activity that we would expect to see. Or if in the event that you were able to negotiate a rate that is lower than that 65%, then OPI has documentation supporting that. And then as payments for claims that are submitted to us, we can monitor whether or not that what is being submitted for reimbursement is based on actuals versus that 65%. And again, if you remember, the reasoning behind that is that in this program that you can't have program income. And so if you're billing at a rate higher than what your actual costs are, then that generates, again, what they call program income. And anything that we identify in the process that's classified as program income, then that funding actually needs to be returned back to DPHHS. Our expectation is really that we don't anticipate that we're going to see any rates that are going to be below the 65%, but just to make sure up front in the process, and then of course under audit, that we have the right documentation, and when we're doing our certification, that we have documentation to support our review and assessment of that. So also in there is that we're going to request that when that check is sent in, or that warrant into OPI, that with the certification form, that you also include a printout from your accounting system that shows the actual fund source. That will be the document that OPI will be able to verify, one, that you guys sent in the right amount, or sent in an amount that's needed, but then also that we can verify that it's coming from a non-federal source. Number 3, I will say this is one that I'm still kind of considering, but I've got it in here, is that we wanted to look at the actual invoice that's being submitted to the school for payment to the third-party provider. And again, part of this is for the certification process is verifying that what you're actually being billed meets our expectations as we have identified in the actual negotiated rate, or that contract that presents the negotiated rate. And so, again, as we think about the process here at OPI, what are the things that we need to attest that what's being submitted meets the requirements of the program itself, and then also that match piece for the intergovernmental transfer, what documentation we might need. This is one of the things that I'm kind of leaning back and forth as to whether or not we'll need it for the certification process. So again, as for right now, I do have that in there. And then the final thing that you'll send in with that warrant, again, is that signed CSCT expenditure certification form, which is that tab here that we discussed a little bit earlier. Okay. So let me take a moment and pause on this right here, because I know this does kind of real briefly goes over the what's going to be required coming in with that warrant, and just see if there's any questions from anybody in regards to that. Let me check in the chat. So let's see, I don't see any. Let's see, not clear why I should do this.
Jay, we did just get one from Mike. He says
Yeah.
He's not clear why this spreadsheet is necessary if we have to provide a hard match.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for the question. So the reason behind this is, if you guys remember back when the prior program was in place, that part of one of the requirements that DPHHS had for the providers was that they had to submit a certification. Okay, the certification actually was a report that came out of the Mayfair system for the Trustees Financial Statement Information that calculated all of your general fund act or non-federal source activities, and then also did a calculation based on the amount of CSCT participants, the students that participate in the program. And then DPHHS would actually send out a letter to those providers stating what, for that year of claims, what their actual max requirement was. And what they did is actually just took that form that came out of the TFS and calculated the match amount that they had calculated they had used in comparison to what the report that Department of Public Health and Human Services sent. And as long as that calculation was higher than what the match requirement was, then it was deemed acceptable that you had met the actual match requirement. And from my understanding is that when CMS came back and took a look at this process and what was actually being certified, that the level of detail was actually insufficient for them to say that, okay, you guys can actually show direct expenditures that are related to the CSCT program and that match is being met. Okay, and so I would agree that yes, you guys in your accounting system are actually, you're booking an expense that for that match itself, but for to prevent any potential future audit risks, then OPI is going to require that you guys can also show that for that match amount, again, let's say if it was $50,000, that you have enough direct CSCT costs that would cover that amount. Or on the back end, if you have, again, non-direct, and those are things where you're not using a project reporter code, things, again, like we've talked about, so rent or utilities, things that would almost have kind of like an in-kind nature, that you can say that those costs you're actually incurring, it's just that you're not booking them in your accounting system as a direct expense. And so the intention of that is that in the event that the auditors come in, whether that's OPI coming in doing a monitoring, whether that's CMS coming in to monitor to verify that we've got adequate support to support the match itself, or whether it's your local auditors coming in and they're verifying the match piece as well, that you have enough documentation to support that. Now, in the submission of Mike or anybody else that for the form itself, that this form, again, is linked over to the CSCT direct and non-direct, and these are just used as a resource. If you at your local school have a different methodology that you want to use to calculate, personal services operational indirects, by direct or non-direct expenditures, that's completely at your discretion. Again, the only thing that we're going to ask is that when this certified form is actually submitted, that if you have a $50,000 match requirement for that month, that once that activity is actually posted in here, that we can see that you've actually met that requirement. These documents here, again, if you use your own methodology or if you utilize the worksheet that's been provided, these are for you to retain for your documents. So then again, if OPI asks for it, CMS or your local auditors, then you guys have that support. Okay.
Jay, I'm gonna go like old school and turn on the camera and the microphone, if that's okay.
Yeah, no.
I guess I'm confused about the whole process, because my understanding was the reason we're having these conversations in the first place is that all of these expenditures that we previously documented, the soft match, if you will, were no longer allowable. So we had to go to this hard cash back and forth method that we're talking about. But yet then we find ourselves back here redocumenting the things that we've already documented. It just seems like we're either doubling up our match because we're sending cash and continuing to document these, or I guess that I don't understand the point of the spreadsheet. If it's allowable, why are we here?
So you're talking about allowable, you mean like the direct expenditures, Mike, that are charged to CST? Right, so exactly. So I mean, you're right. You are going to have like an upfront expenditure that you're going to hit, right, for that match piece that you submit in. But to mitigating your risk that CMS is going to come back and say, well, you guys don't really have documentation to support that. That's why we're saying that you need to certify that you have other direct expenses that you can tie to that match amount. Okay, you have to have support for the back end of it.
And then so isn't the cash doubling then? Isn't the back and forth and the IGT process, isn't that doubling that up?
No, because you're going to have direct expenses. You have, let's say, so for example, if you have certain staff salaries that you're already paying for CSCT services, right? That's stuff that it goes against. You can say that, okay, those are activities that we've incurred that support the CSCT program, right? The hard match that you have to send in to OPI, and because of the issue with CMS, again, you're right, that will book on your expenses and that will show the actual expense of cash going out. But as you get that back in your Fund 15, right, those funds can actually be used to offset other CSCT, other operational costs. So we just want to make sure that for that amount that you're submitting in that match, that you have support activity that supports that actual match expenditure. Right. And again, it goes back to, and I would agree, Mike, it does seem like a lot of administrative work. But again, the issue that we're here before is because of, CMS coming in and saying that those previous reports, and if you look at those, that kind of does the same thing. It takes fiscal activity and it shows that of that activity, you have a certain amount that you can set aside and say that, well, this was direct expenses that, it was money that we had available that would support that CSCT program. But CMS said that's not enough detail. And so that's why OPI is going to request that, that you guys as the providers have that backing, so that if they do come in, they can take a look at it and say, yep, you guys actually do have direct expenses that meet that match.
Just one clarification, CMS, their requirement for an intergovernmental transfer is the transfer of cash before the claim is paid. That's the only requirement from CMS, from the Medicaid
Right.
standpoint. Because we're not doing CPE, we're doing IGT.
Right. Yeah, and so in the IGT process, thanks Megan for that. We thought a lot about that at OPI, and the issue we have with that is that, CMS came back, the first time and said that what we had for reports was not detailed enough. Then what we want to make sure is we need to mitigate the risk that schools, you as the providers, as this process goes, we don't come back and they say, you guys are in the same circumstance where, yes, you guys can show there's an actual transfer of cash, but you have an actual expenses to support that. We want to make sure that we don't run into that same issue, and that puts schools at risk of having to revert funds back to the feds or to CMS. So,
and the cash that we send to OPI and DPHHS through this process isn't adequate enough for that?
Well, again, Mike, I think it's part of it is, where you've got DPHHS side of it, they look at it and say, well, CMS is concerned initially about that cash and that submission of it. But here at OPI, we want to make sure, here for this, as the process goes forward, that we can mitigate any risk that CMS has anything to come back and say that we're not meeting that detailed enough support for that match piece of it. Now, if we come down the road, absolutely. If as we get this process going, we get something that, gives us the assurance that that's actually not necessary, then by all means, we'll adjust the process and change it. If we can say that just that booking of the expenditure initially out for the transfer is sufficient, then we'll go forward with that. But until we're comfortable with that, then we're going to move forward with having the schools give us that actual other certification and have that support.
Do you have any idea what other states are doing about that type of thing? Are they doing this kind of the both sides of this as well? Or do you know what other models are out there?
So some of the other states that we've looked at, it's actually varying, so there's some of them that do it a little bit more loose and some of them that are a little more strict. So, I mean, I don't think there's a one size fits all out there. I think the concept out there is similar, but what actually each state requires differs.
Okay. All right. I'm still trying to wrap my head around. I appreciate the meeting, the ongoing communications here. I'll just listen in for a little bit.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the questions, Mike. Yep. So here's another question. Hold on here. I'm sorry, I'm going to back up here, guys. So I have a question here. Says, is there a way to streamline the monthly workload on districts? We often have over 15 different teams. We are concerned about the burden being placed on the district. Yeah, so I think on the timeline of it, again, we have that workbook that shows out, but what we're looking at is that DPHHS would give us the report for the claims that were submitted on the first of the month. And so, for example, if we're heading into the month of December, on December 1st, we would get a report that showed all claims that were submitted for November. Okay. Including that, once we get that report, we'll actually send out to the provider the report that shows what their actual match liability is and for the claims that were submitted. And schools will have, or providers will have, districts will have 10 days to actually process those and get to OPI by the 10th day the check with all the supporting documentation. Some of the logistics, as for you larger districts that have like you said 15 different teams, that's something where we're trying to make sure that window is open enough that you guys will have time to coordinate all of that with the different schools and actually get that submitted to DPHHS for claim submission and reimbursement. But again, as we go through this process, if what we've always said is if OPI presents in DPHHS a timeline for that claim submission, processing, and actually reimbursement, if it seems too tight, then that's the type of feedback that we need so that we can look at it and assess whether or not we need to adjust the timeline and make it different so you guys have more time to process it. Okay. Next question, is a provider district required to send the invoice to DPHHS as part of the claims process? If so, why is the district required to submit the invoices to OPI as well? Can the two agencies share information to avoid duplicating reporting by the districts? So that's a good question, and Megan, you can back me up if I'm wrong on this. From my understanding is that the invoice that the third-party providers would submit to the school, that does not actually go to DPHHS. when they go in there and they complete that claim in the MMI system, I think it's just a general data entry and there's no support that's submitted. Is that correct, Megan?
So what Medicaid receives is the actual claims. And so I'm not sure exactly what mental health centers have historically provided to school districts, but what we receive is individual and batches of claims.
Yeah, so then I think what we're talking about, an invoice, then know that DPHHS wouldn't have that. And so that's why OPI would request that we have a copy of that. Okay. And so it looks like the duplicate.
Can you talk a little bit about the time turnaround in Helena between the two agencies?
Mhm.
If the getting the bill is the first step, and then we have to send it to Helena and have it bounce around there for a little bit, and then the last step of the process is actually paying them. Do they have the ability to cash flow their operations that long while they're waiting on our bills?
So what it is, from my understanding, is that the actual time frame of reimbursement is not going to change. And Megan, I guess again, I'll have you back me up on that. I think that DPHHS does an actual monthly processing of claims and then reimbursement. Is that correct, Megan?
It will change a little bit. Our claim system is like a bi-weekly processing, but because of this IGT process that we've been legislatively instructed to do, is we will hold the claims and pay them once a month.
Okay. So it might be a couple more weeks, I guess, Mike. But so again, going back to that, kind of the process itself is that DPHHS will submit to OPI on the first of each month, again, the report that reflects by each one of the providers, we'll call them districts, what their actual amount of claims were submitted and then what their match requirement will be. OPI will have that out by hopefully that same day on the first of each month, if not the second day of the month, which then there'll be a 10-day window for schools once they, again, receive the actual report from OPI and when they have time to get that check to OPI for processing will be 10 days. OPI will get that, everything that we get by that 10th day, we'll go ahead and do our reconciliation and confirmation process. And we'll hopefully have that done by the 15th, or I'm sorry, the 11th day or whatever that is on that. And then we have to notify DPHHS that those claims can be actually released. And so timing is if we get it on the first, usually by the third week of that month, OPI and DPHHS have to have everything verified, certified, and then actually submitted for reimbursement because DPHHS on that third Wednesday of the month has to have everything processed for payment on that following Monday. Okay, so the timeline is pretty quick. I mean, and what we're actually going to, actually once you guys get the notification of what your match requirement is to the time that we get everything certified at OPI, DPHHS gets notified and that reimbursement is submitted. We're hoping it'll be, again, just past the 3-week mark. So, and we, and again, that puts, to be honest with you, administratively, that short of a time frame from when OPI receives the actual check and the supporting documents from each one of the providers puts an extreme amount of stress on us because we have a very, very short turnaround time. You're talking a day and a half for us to actually process everything and get over DPHHS. So trying to actually shorten that more would mean that the time that schools would have to get everything completed until OPI would be shorter. And so we're doing our best to try to make sure that the schools have adequate time or a little bit more time than we do to process and get things submitted to try to help with that.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that anybody's wasting time or anything along those lines. I'm just saying that everyone's got their processes, and this is kind of predicated on a best case scenario as far as everything getting through, and there being no questions or anything like that. We've obviously got our processes for writing warrants once we get the approval, so it's a long turnaround time for those guys, and just concerned that they'll be able to cash flow their operations as well.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I take that. We'll take that into consideration, Mike. And I agree. Again, that's why we talked about the timeline, trying to make it as short as possible to try to prevent any of those, claims not getting processed. And again, districts having the ability to cash flow out any expenses that they got to meet. So,
is there a contingency plan or anything like that if this doesn't work, or are we, how confident are you that these processes are going to work right out of the bat, and that we'll be able to meet our obligations and continue to provide these services through these providers? They'll be able to get paid and all that. Is there testing, or just can you walk us through the implementation process here? So I'm concerned, and I just want to have a little more confidence that this is going to work.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Mike. And concern. I mean, to be honest, we worry about a little bit as well. This is a new process. As much as we can try to plan for it and look at anything that may not work, it's going to be a little bit of baptism by fire, because this is something that's new to our state, not only for DPHHS and OPI, but for the districts as well. And so as we go through this, by all means, we're going to be looking at it and making adjustments to the process as needed. But I mean, I don't think it's actually going to be that hard of a process. Again, I think the logistics and the timing of making sure that school districts get the information they need timely, in order for them to do their processing and get that to OPI and DPHHS to do their part of it, and to get that claim submitted out. That, I think, is the biggest risk. Is, again, if those windows are too small, then we'll have to go back and look at that. But I mean, the IGT process, I think conceptually, it's not that hard of a process. It's just there's a lot of players involved in it. So, right.
What are the communication systems between the two agencies, DPHHS and OPI? How does that work? Is it like shared files type thing, or is it emails, or how does that how does it work?
Yeah, so in OPI, DPHHS will email to OPI. I've got staff that's going to be administering this, and so when they receive that, they'll actually email to the provider contact. And then as for the releasing of it, we'll work with through email over to the DPHHS staff that the claims are available, which ones are available and ready for release. Okay, so we don't have there's not like any of a electronic management system, if that's what you're alluding to, Mike, that it's a workflow process or anything like that. We don't have anything like that implemented. Down the road, by all means, if there's something we can do like that to help make it a little bit more efficient, we'll do so. We here at OPI, we do utilize a product called Perceptive from a Highland vendor that the state utilizes for all of our electronic documents. Here in my accounting system, my accounting division, we're completely 100% paperless, and so we have workflows like that built in. But just because of the timing of this and trying to get it implemented, we haven't extended that out with DPHHS or even with the districts at this point, but something we can consider in the future.
Thanks, Jay. I don't mean to keep bombarding with questions. I know there's a lot of folks that are concerned about all this stuff. Can you talk about the positions themselves? We've all heard about the challenges at OPI with getting positions filled. Are these filled, or are we hoping to get them filled, or where do we stand with that issue?
No, so I have staff already ready, right? So one of the things we've already done over these past months is that OPI, again, internally, our processes, we've got it worked out, because we've got two pieces of it. We got receivables coming in for the check processing we got to do, then also for the certification. But our staff is already, we're already got, if somebody hired and we're ready to go. So
okay.
Yeah.
That's good news.
Yep.
That's good news. Okay. I'll shut up again for just a little bit.
No, you can ask as many questions you want. We appreciate it.
I do appreciate the conversation. I don't mean to hog it all. I know there's a lot of other folks on here, but sometimes it's just easier to turn on the camera than type stuff out in chat.
No, and I appreciate that. No, and again, I'll extend out again. Our intention here is to try to make the process as seamless as possible, right? And again, there's pieces of it, components that that we at OPI can look at, and it may seem reasonable, or it sounds like it's going to be reasonable. But as we get moving into this, or even heading into this, your guys' concerns are very valid, and we want to make sure that we hear those, because that also helps us determine whether or not our time frame that we're proposing is going to be sufficient. If it's too short around, or if it's too long, so again, Mike, as we get going forward, and everybody else, if there's timing things, or that, or just in the process that seem like it's not working, without your feedback, we don't have the ability to make any adjustments. Because in any operation, if we don't hear anything, our expectation is that everything's going okay. So again, if there's problems with it, we need to hear that up front, or you guys tell us directly, so then we can take into consideration and make enhancements as necessary.
And I just said I'd shut up, but I'm going to turn around and make a liar out of myself. So we all received some advice from one of the school attorneys in the state late last week, advising us not to to enter into contracts with our providers yet until all this stuff is resolved.
Mhm.
And the rules are final and all those types of things. There's still a process with those rule implementations, correct?
Are you talking about, so like we don't have any, are you talking about like arms?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd pass that to Megan.
Yeah, so the administrative rules that we have are focused really on the programmatic changes, and they were filed in October with a retroactive date of October 1st. And there is a hearing, a public hearing on December 1st at 10 a.m. I can put the information, I'll send it to Tristan so she can share it if anyone wants to, but it was really focused, the rules really focus on the programmatic changes to CSCT.
Is this process part of those rules and rule adoptions?
Um,
Subject to that, that's usually where those things are laid out, is I believe, is that correct?
Yeah, the process is mentioned at a very high level in the administrative rules, but not really. But I'll send Tristan the whole rule package that includes the public hearing day, and then I'll highlight which area it is that that mentions the IGT, but it's very high level.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, well, great. Real quick, I'm going to jump down the next one. It says, I'm not in a good spot on this mentally. We use CSCT. They bill Medicaid. We get the check and forward the funds to CSCT. Basically in and out. Our match has historically been the office space, phone lines, supplies. Now it appears that I have actually submit monthly reports and payment to OPI. And so, Ann, you're right that the process is changing, that it's not like where it used to be like a certified public expenditure where you guys actually did all of that. The only thing you had to do was that in-kind piece, is where now that because of the changes per the legislature, that you do actually have to send cash to OPI for whatever your match requirement is for the claim submitted for that month. And so as you, again, once OPI sends you the actual report that shows what your claim is, you'll get the supporting documentation and send a physical warrant to OPI for deposit that we'll deposit here. Once we've done our certification, we actually transfer that money, your match piece, over to Department of Public and Health and Human Services, who will then send back to you the piece that CMS is going to reimburse, which is around that 65%, as well as that 35% of that match piece that you sent in. And so again, we go back to talking about the rate negotiations, that as long as a district can negotiate at that 65% of the approved daily per diem rate, then that 35% match that you sent will actually come back to your district to be deposited in your Fund 15. But you're right, you're absolutely right, is that, you know, there's no longer just the documentation of certifying that you've got an in-kind, that you actually do have to send physical cash to OPI to meet that match requirement. Okay, and then at the Education Interim Committee last week, Mafi Fung suggested to Superintendent Arnson that we hit the reset button on CSCT funding. There is ample money available to cover this program. Let's take the pressure off OPI and our school districts and take the time to deliberate with due consideration and create a system that truly does minimize the administrative burden on school districts. The superintendent agreed. We see what do people think and what would be the best way to go about this. And so the funding of the program at this point, you know, we don't have any ability to request any money to fund the program. And so as of right now, what we're held to is actually implementing the IGT process. You know, future funding of the program, you know, will have to be dealt with during the next legislative session. And so again, I mean, if you have the concerns, I would work with your partners, you know, in the legislature to work at getting this actually funded. And that's all the questions I see in the chat.
Dustin has his hand up. Dustin,
Oh,
you
Dustin,
can go
okay.
ahead and talk.
Hey, Dustin.
Hey, thanks, Jay. It's more of a question for Megan, I guess, regarding IGT process and just a historical understanding of, is this something that, it sounded like you said to Mike that this was a requirement from CMS or Medicaid. Help us understand how this was done before, or was it never done before?
Sure. So specific to CSCT, we have historically utilized what's called a certified public expenditure process to fund the state share of Medicaid. And that was happened for a long time, probably like around 18 years. And it was a pretty favorable, it was approved by CMS the way we were doing it. And it was a pretty favorable process. And so over the years, not just with Montana or CSCT, but with across the whole country and many different Medicaid programs that were utilizing CPE, the federal government really started to crack down and have more strict requirements on CPE. And so they informed us, our Montana Medicaid, that we could no longer use the approved CPE that we had been using to fund CSCT. So that's historically what happened. Then moving into like what currently is happening right now, DPHHS asked for in my budget request in the governor's budget, we asked for the state match, just like I pay for all the other services that I have, like psychiatry or outpatient therapy. I asked for the state match. It was included in Governor Bullock's budget and Governor Gianforte's budget, but the legislature did not approve the funding for CSCT, and rather we got a bill that requires OPI and DPHHS to work together to maximize the federal match for things. So there are two ways that you can have three ways you can match the Medicaid payment. One is just traditional, like the Medicaid agency pays the state match. That's what I do for outpatient therapy or group homes or things like that. That's not an option because we didn't receive any funding for CSCT in our Medicaid budget. The second option is CPE, which is certified public expenditure. That's what we had been doing before, but the way we were doing it was disapproved. CPE is still allowed, but it's very labor intensive. It takes a lot of time to set up, and it takes a lot of like analysis on true costs, and it's very limited in what a school district could record as a cost to be the state match. So that would be like similar to what we had been doing before, but like a lot more detail, because we wouldn't be able to ever do just like an annual certification again. Like that's just never going to be approved. And so because we've received such a small amount of bridge funding, the only real viable option was an intergovernmental transfer. And in that funding, it's a commonly used funding stream for Medicaid, in which a local government sends the state share to the Medicaid agency, and then we pay the claim. So that was really the one that we were able to implement in such a short period of time with very little, bridge funding that we received. Does that answer your question, Dustin?
Yeah, it does help, because I mean, a lot of this too is going to be discussions at the school board level, right? Because we have to put these agreements through and try to explain what's happening. So I appreciate kind of the historical. There's a lot of this stuff was occurring beyond our kind of in the background. I mean, we get, provider bills, they, we get the money, the school district gets the money from DPHHS, but we didn't really know what this other stuff was going on in the background. I mean, it seems like what's being billed and what we're getting at that FMAP rate and everything is kind of basically staying the same. It's just this new match or IGT, which there's some disconnect there, which is like, okay, is it a match or is it the state not funding it, or now it's like this IGT where we pay and then we get the same amount back, so it's not really any out of cost. So it's just confusing. So I do appreciate the additional information.
Yeah, and you're right, Dustin. I think it is news. Again, where the schools, when you guys had your CSCT services, a bill was submitted to the CMS for reimbursement. You receive money back and you just paid the invoice, and that was the end of it. That match piece that's happening, that requirement was being done at the state levels, where you're right. Now you're going to start seeing that, and it has to be done at the local level instead. So. Okay, good. So, any other questions? I don't see any other hands up, Tristan. I don't see anything else.
I think we might have one from Chadberg that we didn't answer quite yet. It says conceptually, it seems like we are being required to provide fed up documentation for CMS's acceptations on a certified public expenditure process, even if not required, but for the IGT process. What is the minimum required CMS documentation needed for an IGT process?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for the question. So again, I think you're right that the look of this is a little different. One, you guys having to make that payment up front for that match piece and actually booking that, but then also having that documentation that OPI is saying we need just to verify that we have enough documentation that in the event that CMS looks at it, we won't run into the same situation where we are now, where we're having to change the process itself. Again, that previous where Megan said that where they used to be able to do that annual certification, that's no longer going to be available. And so this monthly claims processing and verification is what we've come up with the IGT process itself. So.
And so the minimum required CMS documentation for an IGT process, it's a really pretty simple process in Medicaid financing, which is where a local government, which in this case would be the local education agency, provides the state match. So it's required that the cash change hands to the Medicaid agency prior to a claim getting paid. So that's really the main requirement. And then we have to make sure that we get the rate approved as like a reasonable rate. They're used a lot in nursing homes, county nursing homes or county ambulances in Montana.
Right.
Okay, there's some questions in the Q&A thing too, and I just want to make sure I'm clear about it. So once these indirect costs is not the right word for it, but the cost that we use to show the district's contribution towards the program, those can't be moved to the reimbursement, right? Those have to stay in the general fund, and we can move other costs not associated with CSCT to that Fund 15 reimbursement to make the general fund whole. Is that
right? That's correct, Mike. And again, that's when we talk about like the cost of this. Is that it's kind of it's a budgetary concept. Is that as you budget in your general fund or that non-federal fund, that you're going to be paying out that 35%. Once that funding comes back again, as long as those negotiated rates afford you that the ability to get back that 35%, then you're right. You can take that Fund 15 money and pretty much use it for any of your operational costs that are, again, if you want to go in there and use it for a non-federal source, we'll use the general fund in this example, and you want to, abate any of the expenses in your general fund that you want to move over to Fund 15, then you can do that. So although you've got an expense going on up front, as you receive that money in the back end on Fund 15, you have the ability to make your budget whole It's just that it's budgeted differently. Okay. Again, with that in mind, remember one thing you can't do is that those CSCT costs, you can't take that money that comes back into the general fund. I'm sorry, not the general, my apologies. Fund 15. So when you receive back that match portion, it's accounted for in Fund 15. You cannot recycle that money and use that for future match requirements that you're going to have for future claims that are submitted. So you're right, Mike. Again, it gives you flexibility as you get it back. You can still make your general fund whole. It's just that of how you actually account for it. You can't go in and abate that match payment out. Otherwise, it washes it out and never happened. So. Yeah. So again, part of that, we talk about, the term that always comes up in this whole process is administrative burden. It's going to be, again, one, from a budget perspective, administratively going out and kind of figuring that out. But two, there's also going to be some back end accounting that needs to happen in order to make those non-federal sources whole, if you have that ability.
Yeah, that back end accounting was kind of my next question or point. The clerks on this call, the business managers, we're going to have to start developing some receivable and payable processes so we can track this, because this will be there will be some reporting work to do at year end for money that you haven't received back from OPI and bills that you haven't paid yet to your providers. So be well advised to start working on those processes and start thinking that part through as well.
Exactly. Yeah. No, thanks, Mike, for that. Yeah. So fiscal year end is definitely going to be a consideration from an accounting perspective that you guys need to make sure you handle. And the one thing I will say too is that if you guys go out there on our OPA website and you use that, that form that we've created, if you look at things of taking annualized costs that you're going to use for part of that match certification, those are things that you can actually do now. And you can start getting a lot of that set up so that when we in January go to actually make that first claim processes, that first month's of claims, which will actually be December's, that will pay out in January, that everything is already kind of done and you've had time to prep for that. Hopefully that will understand with holidays and everything coming up, that might reduce some of that initial administrative burden. And the one thing to think about as well, that as you're doing that calculation of what your certifications are that you have, that activity actually goes back to July 1st of the fiscal year. So July of 2021. So for our fiscal year 22, you're already going to have 6 months worth of expenses that you can use or apply to that match, meeting that match requirement. And so, again, if you take that time up front now, all that money that all those expenses you've already identified will not only cover that January, but you can use that to carry over the subsequent months. And so for that first year of this program, you're going to have quite a bit of activity that you guys will have available to apply. And so it should make it easier as we move forward, we're hoping. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thank you for that. Again, Mike, as I've reached out to you and other things with some of the stuff with the accounting guidance, again, your guys' input for helping us, again, you guys are the ones that are out there at the local level in the trenches from day to day. And so again, your guys' input is extremely welcomed. And so any of those things that you guys think of, happy to take that.
Can I throw something out, Jay? And I don't know what to necessarily do about this. So I'm sitting here, my phone's like lighting up while we're talking. People are confused. Mm-hmm. They're concerned about all this stuff, and I don't know what the answer is. I know OPI is doing everyone's kind of OPI and DPHHS. We're kind of throwing this pile of nasty leftover turkey to deal with, and everyone's doing the best that they can, but I think folks are confused and they're concerned about that. I don't need it's not criticism at all, because I don't want it to even seem like that, because that's not the case at all. But I think we have a mutual issue that we need to work through, and folks are just confused. So right. You don't even need to respond, but I just wanted to throw that out there and let everybody know that they're being heard.
Yeah, no, again, thank you, Mike, for that. So, I mean, if, as we've been representing through this whole thing is that if anybody is confused in this process, please reach out to us. When we come to these meetings, we hear that, a lot of times, even our meeting last month, after the fact, I got emails from some of the folks that actually had questions, and they were still had more questions. And so we actually set up a one-on-one meeting with them. It's if people are confused, these opportunities here where we talk about doing the Q&A and stuff where we can answer questions is great. But if we walk away from this and you're still having questions, please email me, call me. Let's set up a one-on-one. Let's, hash out those questions individually. I mean, it is nice in this forum because I'm sure other people have the same concerns or questions. But, again, if we walk away from this and you still have questions, please reach out to OPI. Give us the opportunity to talk about it. Again, as I say, the more that we hear from the folks in the field that are going to be dealing with this, the better understanding that we have, and then the better opportunity we have to make enhancements or adjustments to this process. So, yeah, so thank you, Mike. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Jay, this is Shanna at Havre Public Schools, and maybe you've already addressed this in some other place, but how it used to work was we would use the only thing that I remember doing from my side for the Medicaid portion was we have like the MAC reporting, and I'm sure that there's other districts out there that have that. Are we able to use that same MAC reporting for this? Like, I don't want to use it in one area and then, but it's already set up. So I'm seeing it as like less work for myself, if you will, to go ahead and just use that same system for the allowable costs. Can we use it in both places or not? Oh, sorry. If this question is for you, Megan, great. Thanks.
So the MAC process is Medicaid administrative claiming, and it truly is a certified public expenditure process where there's time studies and, like all those things you have to fill out. So in that case, that is a CPE for Medicaid, and it is required by Medicaid because this CSCT is not a CPE for Medicaid. That is not required. So we can't use that because it's not a CPE. It's an intergovernmental transfer, which really all we have to do is receive the state share. Does that answer your question? I mean, the answer is no. Unfortunately, we can't use the same one because that truly is a Medicaid CPE that is required, and we wouldn't be able to use that system for a non-Medicaid CPE.
I understand not using that system, but if we have it set up in our software system, and Mike, maybe you can be more eloquent about this because you know how I can't ask questions, but if we can use the same, I guess, verification that we had the expenditures that we use for that program and use it for this, like within our own system, if we already have it set up, or are we doubling up by doing that? Like right now, it takes all of our expenditures for admin salaries, a portion of it, and it spits it out into this nice little report. Is that something that if all of us are used to doing that, we can just go ahead and use and for our match? Or Jay, maybe I can send you the example of what I'm talking about, and you can take a look at it. Would that be better?
Yeah, Shannon, thanks for that. So yeah, again, I'm not familiar with that, but how about we do this? I know time-wise we're just about out of time, but if you don't mind, I'll reach out to you, and if you wouldn't mind helping me just understand a little better, we can talk about that. If that works.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks, Shannon. Okay, guys. Well, it looks like we're just about out of time, and so I just again want to extend our appreciation from OPI here and DPHHS for meeting with us today. And again, I appreciate all of the questions. And again, I just want to extend out that opportunity that if in the event that somebody has questions or you're still concerned with understanding how this is going to work, please reach out to me. My contact information is can I shoot it here? I guess real quick. It's actually out on our website. If you go to that, where our CSCT documents are, it's out there. But please reach out to me. Happy to do some one-on-ones with you. I've had lots of school districts that we've actually been doing that with, and we've even been meeting with the third-party providers to help answer some of their questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming in today, and I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving and the rest of the week, and we will be talking to you soon. Thank you.